you go through high school, you go through college, and you end up getting married, and your wife applies to the FBI for you, like you had mentioned.
Yeah.
So you weren't even planning on applying to the FBI.
No, I never had any interest in law enforcement. I was a writer. I was born a writer. When I was a kid, that was a thing. Now writing is, people don't even know what that is, but when I was a kid, that was a lifestyle, right? I wanted to grow up writing books. I wanted to live a lifestyle. I wanted to be Ernest Hemingway or many of the people I looked up to. And in order to do that, I always wanted to live a life of adventure. I didn't want to just sit and write. I wanted to write about war and travel and adventure. And along the way, you check boxes. Out of college, I moved to LA to be a rock star. It didn't go very well, but I gave it a shot, right? And from there, I went back to the East Coast and I worked as an English teacher at a boarding school. From there, I went to work as a newspaper reporter. And from the newspaper, a congressman in Massachusetts hired me to go to Washington, D.C. and write his speeches. So at the age of 24, maybe, I was living in D.C. as a speechwriter on Capitol Hill. And I always liked to fight, so I boxed out of a gym in D.C. called Finley's Boxing Gym. And I went to the gym one day, got knocked the fuck out, and went home. And I go into my apartment, and my wife said, hey, you got a mail. And I checked the mail, and it was from the FBI. Nobody wants to get mail from the FBI.
Right.
And I had no idea what it was or why it was. And I had a pretty good concussion, so I'm puking, and it was not a good time to get something from the FBI. And it was the formal application. So she had seen a commercial on TV, of all things. She wrote into the FBI. They sent me an application, and that's, it went from there.
Okay. So you applied to be in the FBI. You passed.
Yes.
And now you're an agent, and they transfer you to Springfield, Missouri?
Yeah, they sent me to Kansas City, which is the division. The FBI has field offices around the world. The myth that it's just in the United States is just that. It's not true at all. But I think at the time there were 52 or 54 FBI offices in the United States. They also have satellite offices they called resident agencies. So I went to Kansas City, but they shipped me to Springfield, Missouri, which at the time had 6 agents. So that I spent 4 years there.
Right. And on your first day on the job in Springfield, Missouri, you were investigating a bank robbery and a shootout occurred?
Yeah, kind of like that. I went in, I was more or less reading the newspaper and taking a leak when somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, kid, get your body armor, we got a job. Day 1, 10 o'clock in the morning, had a cup of coffee, no idea about anything, straight out of the academy. And the squad I was placed on, the bank robbery squad, had something come up, and they found a bank robber in a house, and they wanted to get the bank robber out, but somebody else was in the house. So they had to lure the bank robber out under a ruse. So they went up to the front door selling tickets to like a VCR. People don't even know what that was, but it's like, hey, we're selling tickets, at a baseball raffle, like a little league thing or something. And it went bad. I mean, this guy comes out. I remember him stepping out, and he had this big chrome .357 Magnum revolver, and there was people everywhere. The cars parked up and down the street, and it just became a really big deal. But the funny thing about that experience, because many FBI agents never pull their gun in their entire life. I mean, it's not what you see on television for the most part. It's a small organization. They have a limited responsibility, and at the time, that wasn't the thing. However, I just thought, okay, cool. Day 1 is a gunfight. That's the way it is. So they had put me as the new agent in the back of a Volare, this old ugly car. And it was the head of the squad, the supervisor, and it was the number 2 guy in the office, an assistant special agent in the charge. So I'm riding with the bosses. I didn't realize it was so they could prevent me from doing anything stupid, which I did. So I jump out of the car, pull out my gun, and everybody's getting engaged, and I hear somebody yelling my name, and I'm thinking, what, they want me to charge the house or something, And a guy turns to me, and he looks at me, and he goes, Whitcomb, put that gun back in your holster, hide behind that tire, I don't want to see you again. Which is not what you want to hear, right? So I do it. Then I hear people yelling my name, and they're yelling at me because I don't have my gun out, and I'm not engaged, and I'm hiding behind the wheel of a car. So what you would think of as being an exciting first day on the job ended up being kind of a comedy of errors to a certain extent, I suppose. But anyways, that defined what ended up being my FBI career.
Right, because after that, you started working on bank robberies and fugitives.
Yeah.
Any crazy situations happen outside of that shooting?
Tons of crazy situations. So the Springfield, Missouri was the gateway to the Ozarks. And you've seen the television show, people talk about the Ozarks, the banjo playing and the corncob pipe and all that. It's nothing like that. I love the Ozarks. I love Springfield, Missouri. I love that part of the world. At the time, I was coming from Washington, D.C. to the Midwest. I'd never even heard of Missouri. And all of a sudden, I'm living there and find out it was the world capital of exotic crime. I mean, we had everything. We'd have a bank robbery, 2 or 3 a month. We'd have fugitives coming from all over the place. It was fantastic work. If you're an FBI agent, if you work in law enforcement in general, it was fantastic. It was just wild, constant excitement.
Now, were you going undercover at this point?
No, I didn't. It was just standard work. You get up in the morning, you drive your bureau car to the office, read the paper, have a cup of coffee, you work your cases. There were 6 of us, so we had a large geographic area. My territory was probably 2 or 3 hours across to drive from one thing to another. But it was just, there were so many experiences that many in law enforcement, many in the FBI don't get. So I was very fortunate. Many get sent to New York or LA. They work on applicants. They do things that are not, in the early years, I should say. But I was very fortunate that I got a very broad spectrum of cases during those 4 years, and it was great. It was a great time.
Well, by 1991, you're around 32 years old. You end up getting into the FBI hostage rescue team, the HRT.
Yeah.
Now, this was created after the 1972 Munich Olympics terrorist attack.
Right.
Where I guess they couldn't send in SEAL Team 6 or Delta Force because it was international and they could only work domestically, I guess, or...
No, that's a myth. The reason the federal government started the FBI hostage rescue team is simple. There's a law called the Posse Comitatus, enacted after the Civil War, that prevented the federal government from using military and civilian law enforcement. Over time, civilian law enforcement evolved to where we had international terrorism. Terrorism prior to 9/11 was considered law enforcement. If somebody hijacked a plane, blew up the World Trade Center, the first one, anything of that nature, the U.S. government would send law enforcement, meaning the FBI, to resolve it. They would find them, they would arrest them, and bring them back. So in 1982, leading up to the '83 Olympics in Los Angeles, they realized that if something happened like the Munich Games, where they had the tragedy of the hostage taking, that if something like that happened, the federal government needed somebody to send after the bad guys to try to resolve the situation. They could not send Delta, and they could not send SEAL Team 6, which at the time were the 2 counterterrorism hostage rescue components of the federal government. And people don't realize they are now, post-Afghanistan and Iraq, they are special warfare fighting groups. At the time, they were very secretive counterterrorism response groups. So it might take some explaining, but they went, SEAL Team 6, it's called SEAL Team 6, but they're quite different than the regular SEAL teams in their mission. And Delta at the time was quite secretive, and they're actually within the Ranger battalions, but they were quite different as well. So in 1982, the Attorney General of the United States said, what are we going to do? Somebody said Delta. The Attorney General went to Fort Bragg and watched a demonstration from Delta, and they have incredible capabilities and resources. But after the demonstration, the Attorney General said, well, that's fantastic, but I don't see any handcuffs. And one of the operators looked at him and said, we don't use handcuffs. Everybody gets 2 right here. And for a law enforcement agency like the FBI, they couldn't do that. So the government went to Delta and said, can you help us build a team on the civilian side? They put it in the FBI. It's a model of Delta. It was built by Delta, and it had the same weapons and tactics. It had the same responsibility, but it was on the civilian side. So it was a component that the government put within the FBI because they needed a host. They needed some organization. They didn't put it in the Marshals. They didn't put it in the LAPD. And even though many of those techniques came out of other organizations, they put it in the FBI. So by the time 91 rolled around, I was going to get transferred to LA or New York or someplace I didn't want to go. I applied for the team. They have a selection once a year. I made it, and that was the big transition in my life.
Okay, so as an HRT member, you're a sniper, You're an assaulter, a breacher, and you do tactical operations.
Yes.
So you're basically a SEAL member in the FBI, essentially.
Yeah, and you say that it's interesting because the way that world works, you have to have expertise. In order to get that expertise, you have to be taught from somebody who already knows it. In the early 90s, that expertise had not been evolved to what people know now. Everyone knows SEAL Team 6 went after bin Laden. They know they had stealth helicopters. They have a basic idea how it works. In those days, we're talking 30 years ago, we were inventing that stuff as we went along. So at the time, if you wanted to stand up a special operations group like the hostage rescue team, you had to go and find people that could teach you what they were doing. So I've said this before, and I won't get into great detail, but when the Army's Delta Force stood up, they pioneered things like close quarter combat, the elements of hostage rescue. And to do that, they took those from the law enforcement community. So Delta, when it stood up, actually learned a lot from what they did from the LA SWAT team and people that were pioneering those techniques. They leaned on the FBI for a lot of that training. So when the government decided to build HRT, they went back to Delta. So to answer your question, the hostage rescue team within the FBI was built in the model and in the style of Delta. So it is a military style organization within the FBI. Does that make better sense?
Right.